What's up, everyone? Today we have an interesting little project. Probably one that you're kind of wondering why I'm looking at shovels, but here we are. We're going to add a motor to a shovel. I'm joking, that'd be ridiculous. Besides, I already have augers. What we're going to do is we're going to make a special shovel designed for tree cutting. Well, tree digging, tree removal, let's say that. So, backstory on this. I did a couple of these for a neighbor of mine, and then I decided to make a couple, and then he asked me if I could keep doing them because he works in that line of work, and I said yes. So I just kept making them. He keeps bringing me some, so this is probably number, I don't know, like 20 now. And basically what we're doing is we're taking one shovel and another shovel, and we are turning it into one shovel. So 2 goes to 1. What's that going to do? Well, it makes the reach a whole lot deeper and easier to cut tree limb or tree roots and everything. So this is going to involve welding, it's going to involve cutting, it's going to involve some grinding and cleaning. The good thing about this is, 1, it could be cheap. 2, I don't know about where your area is, but for my area, one of these shovels completely cleaned and looking nice and fully welded is about $180 to $200. It's crazy. And yeah, it's something else. Knowing that, what do you need? You need 2 shovels. Ideally, what you would do is you would go to places like estate sales because you need a heavier shovel. You can't just get a cheap shovel and do this. It will bend, it will break. So don't even bother. I like going to estate sales because generally they've had their shovels for a very long time and they're very thick. They're very good materials. Even the handles are sometimes a lot better. I mean, they've been used, so there's that, but they have also been used, so they're tried and true. Doesn't mean you have to. This one is brand new. I ripped a sticker off right before I started recording. So you don't have to wait until they're old. You can just buy them brand new. If you do buy them brand new, make sure it's like this. There's no wrinkle in the middle. If you see anything with a wrinkle in the middle, that means that wrinkle's there for added support and stability. That's not going to help you out in this situation. You're not going to add nearly enough length, and you're just going to add more stress. It's going to break. So it needs to be thicker metal. It needs to be wrinkle-free. Very first thing is, we do need a cut. I'm going to use a plasma cutter because I have one. I like using it. And probably more importantly is I forgot to order cutoff discs. So however you want to cut it, hand file, however you want to cut it, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be cutting a V in it. I would recommend cutting the V in the shovel that you're going to be attaching everything to, because you're going to throw away a handle, or I would recommend keeping it for a backup. But either way, the owner of these 2 shovels, so this isn't mine, wants this one to be the good new permanent shovel. So what that means is we're going to be cutting a V. He's already had this done once or twice, and as you can tell, it's used a lot in his line of work, which is why we're adding to it. So I'm going to cut the V at the current weld, and then I'm not going to touch a single thing in the other one. And once I get done with that, I'll bring you back. Now, that little foot peg I'll come back to later. That's something I generally don't. It's not as easy, let's just say that. I'm usually having to add that, but we'll discuss this. Let me go over that V a little more in depth. So what you're going to want to do is take a measurement of the width of the shovel. Whatever that measurement is, take half of it, mark it in the center. Then what you're going to want to do is find where in the shovel it starts to, where it's no longer straight, but it starts to kind of curve in. We want to go to the furthermost point where it's still straight, and you're going to cut right at that curve. You don't have to do it that way. It's just a whole lot less work at the end if you just do it that way. If you really need a super long one, you don't have to do that. but either way, that's usually going to be about 12 to 14 inches at the end of everything, and that seems to be a pretty desirable size. So that's how I end up doing it, because as you can tell, if you don't, this person did not, you end up with this little bubble. It's not the end of the world, don't get me wrong, but yeah. So now that you know we're marking off the side, marking off right here, the V, you technically could just go all the way across, but that makes fit up a whole lot harder. It's a lot easier if we just put it in the V. Not 100% sure why that is, but I've done straight across and it's a whole lot more difficult. Probably just because every shovel is a little bit different, unless you get two of the exact same ones. If you do, then you probably don't have to worry about it, but because we're doing two separate ones, yeah, which is another thing. You want to find some that are generally the same. You can't have one that's super big and super large, generally the same size. Otherwise, yet again, you'll have a lot of work ahead of you. It's kind of the benefit of this. You can do as much work as you want to it, but if you're going to be selling it, it's going to take a lot of work. So that's 180 bucks. You probably spent like 20, 30 bucks at a yard sale, but you're going to be spending like an hour or two on it, depending on how well you want to get it done. I don't really know why it would take 2 hours unless you're that much of a perfectionist, but probably the longest it took me to do one, besides this one because I'm recording, was about 1 hour and 20 minutes, and that was because they were just completely different sizes, and I tried to make it work, and it did work. Like I said though, it just will take a whole lot more time. So enough talking, I'm gonna go ahead and get cutting. Now that one's done, I took it, and then I took a Sharpie, which unfortunately only a green. Don't know where the black Sharpie is, but placed down here, I went as low as I possibly could, and I made it as even as I possibly could. I put a outline of what I cut on the back of this one. Now remember, we're gonna need the top of it, so we're trying to go as far down as we can. That way we can make it as long as possible. Now this is probably going to be closer to 14 inches at the end of it, which apparently is more desirable, so that's good. And yeah, one thing to note, if you are using a plasma cutter, make sure to be very careful. Nothing should have anything around you that should be combustible. Gasoline, oil, paper, anything. So be careful. I hope I wouldn't have to say that, but if you're using cutoff wheel, same thing. No flammables around you. You will need to make sure that this is as safe as possible. That's why we're by the door. All the gasoline and propane and acetylene and all that nonsense is gone, so we don't have to worry about any accidents. Also, whatever you're using, be sure to use the proper safety equipment, face masks, goggles, eye protection, whatever you need to use. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to get this second one cut, and we'll do that. What I will tell you though is, I'm not going to show it, is if you do use a plasma cutter, you are going to have to clean up the cuts with like a flap disc, because they're not going to be very perfect. They're going to have, you know, like remnants of steel, dross, stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and get this one's done. Now that's all cleaned up, we want to make sure it fits well. Now that should be, when you're cleaning, you want to make sure you're making it fit well. But I want to say it's going to be something like that. There's going to be a little bit of a gap, but here's a caveat about that gap. Before, I almost always TIG weld this. To be honest, I would rather be TIG welding it now. If you're TIG welding it, then you are definitely going to want to have almost no gap at all. However, I feel as if MIG welding, it would be better to have a little bit of a gap, because A, it's a whole lot easier to fill a gap with MIG welding, and B, it kind of adds a little bit of strength to it too, because it's really hard to if you're getting good penetration with TIG, your welds are going to be strong. MIG welding, it's a little bit different in my opinion. I could just be doing it wrong, I don't know. But very pretty looking MIG welds, look like they have good penetration, that look like they did well and everything, are often sometimes the worst ones. So, and I also want to say this: we are going to be going far from pretty on this. We want strength. In fact, we are probably going to be grinding it down because the owner does not want to see the welds. He needs a smooth surface on both sides. So, having said that, I'm going to be MIG welding this because I did leave a gap, and the fact that I don't think you are going to be TIG welding this. There's not too many people out there that do, but know that you can. But if you are going to be TIG welding it, I mean, if you are going to be, you're probably a pretty decent TIG welder. Just know that the gap has to be pretty much nothing, because no one wants to be the gap filler for TIG welding. But for MIG, you do actually want a small gap. Adds a little bit to the strength. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of acetone, clean the surface, take a flap wheel, clean the surface before, and then take the acetone. This is paint, so I'm going to take all the paint off for about probably like an inch on both sides. That way we can get as clean of a weld as possible, and then we will do that. So I guess I'll just start cleaning. Gonna test the fit up actually one more time after all cleaned. Yeah, should be pretty good. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to get the welder out. Now, something I do want to mention is when cleaning, this is paint on one of them, dirt, potentially rust, all kinds of weird crap. So don't be doing this in an enclosed area where the dust that you're going to be inhaling. Try to do it in a well-ventilated area and with a mask on. Everyone has masks due to the current situation. Granted, I don't know what time you're watching this, but right now I have like 1,000 masks in my car, so I just go and grab one. And, you know, no one wants to be that person that ruins their lungs because of rust dust. Imagine having that on your death certificate. Lung failure due to shovel creation. Okay, we're pretty much done welding. Well, I have other stuff to weld today, but for the shovel. And there we go. So we're done at that point. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to take a flap disc. I'm going to level it all out to kind of level out the ends a little bit. Maybe add a little weld on the end because I think it got a little nasty, but that's what happens. So we should be good to go. I'm going to take that flap wheel, I'm going to let it cool a little bit and get that cleaned up and see if we need anything additional. I do not believe that we will, but I think we're pretty much set to go on that part, which brings us to the foot peg. So this is a piece of 1-inch pipe that's roughly 4 inches long, 4.5 inches long, something of that type of length, whatever you would prefer. I think this one is exactly 4 inches. If I could find a tape measure while I talk, I'll show you. But basically what you end up doing is cutting a square and then taking a flap disc or a notcher if you have one. If you don't, then just take the same flap disc. Yeah, 4 inches. Take the same flap disc and put a curve into it until you get a nice, good circular connection to the shaft. Where do you put it? Well, that depends on how long you have or how much material you have to work with. Generally, I think it's easier the higher up you go. I have seen them when they're all the way down here. Those apparently are not nearly as convenient because... So the purpose of this is to make a root ball. When they dig up a tree, you're supposed to make a root ball so the tree still has roots and still has dirt, still has ability to maintain moisture, all that stuff. Well, you know, some of these trees can have some fairly decent sized root balls, and you're still having to cut roots. And some of the easier ways are just to put your foot onto it and press down, maybe. I don't know, I'm not really the one doing it. But either way, having the ability to have a foot peg a little higher up when you've already done a significant amount of work seems to be helpful. So, it's nothing special, just as, like I said, 1 inch to a 1 inch pipe, put a groove into it or a little circular groove, put it on there and then weld it on. I would show you how to do that, but this one was already done, so it's a little hard, but I think you get the idea. So I'm going to spend a little time. I'm going to clean it up, get it the welds flattened, get it cleaned up, and then we will go to the final step. At this moment in time, you should really check for anything that's wrong. I noticed there's a crack here. It's a lot easier to see on the front. Well, probably not for you, but there's definitely a crack. So, at this point, what do you do? Well, you drill it. Put a hole in the crack, and then I'm going to take a burr and kind of carve it out a little bit with a Dremel. And at that point, I'm going to just weld up the crack, weld up the hole, clean it up, and it should be ready. So if you find any cracks, they're almost always going to be there, here, here, pretty much just that area in general. If you see anything, definitely consider it a good opportunity to get it fixed right now. This is the next part that may or may not be needed, because right now it's welded, it's cleaned up. Don't really have to do a whole lot more if you don't want to. It just looks nasty. I mean, one has paint, one doesn't. A little rusty, stuff like that. Not the greatest. Oh, FYI, I decided to take the drill bit, drill the end of the hole out, or the crack, what you should always do whenever you're fixing or repairing a crack. And then I just took my plasma and cut the crack, filled it in with weld. Now it's good to go. Another way of doing that. TIG welding would be a lot easier. You could just put a little bead on top of it, maybe the back. Probably won't have to if you get it hot enough, and it's fixed. MIG, I feel like that was a better solution. But if you don't have a plasma cutter, then I would just definitely gouge it out pretty heavily and then just fill it in. But that was a lot easier. Anyway, let me introduce you to your new friend if you do want to continue. It's called the surface preparation disc, or I call it a spaghetti wheel. I'm going to put the spaghetti wheel on my grinder. I'm going to remove all the paint, all the rust, everything until it's shiny bright metal. This is per the customer's request. If you don't, like I said, you don't want to do it, then don't. I like doing it this way because it's a clean, smooth surface, and that's what he wants. So he keeps it rust free. He treats it every time he uses it. I'm assuming, I don't know, I never got one that was super rusty. A little bit, but not super rusty. The good thing about these wheels are they're meant to take off only paint and rust and very little material beneath it, if any at all. You'll barely be able to see any sparks whatsoever. You can grind on that thing all day. The only thing you'll see is your wheel getting a little rounded, like mine. These actually last quite a bit, very long, I should say. I bought a pack of 5. After about 20 shovels, I think I had to buy another pack not that long ago. I used this to remove a bunch of paint off of a cylinder for something. Not like a gas cylinder, but like a propane cylinder. And yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. We'll get it nice and shiny and we'll be back. Okay, all done. Got it all cleaned up. Paint is looking good off, and I think that's about it. You can buy protectants, anything that just prevents rust. I use shark hide, but you can use whatever you want. I think there's like a marine oil that's usually really good. I saw online, but I've yet to try that. I usually just use shark hide. Maybe I'll try the other one. But other than that, you sharpen it, you use it, you give it to the person that's going to be buying it, your buddy, whoever, whatever you want to do. At the end of it, let's see where, let me grab my tape measure. It ended up lengthwise. Let's just put you down, make it easier for both of us.